Well, hello again, friends. I hope you're keeping well. I hope that you've had an enjoyable Christmas break. And here we are. We are on the verge of a new year. And as we look ahead to 2024 and all that it offers, I'd like to provide just a couple of thoughts on one more reading from the book of Hebrews that we followed all the way through Advent. Just three verses that come near the end of the book and at the beginning of chapter 12. Let me read that to you now. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. I'm sure I'm not the only person among us who has noticed that when you get to this time of year and you open a newspaper, every article you read appears to be a variation on one of two themes. It's either a review of the year which has just passed or a set of predictions about the year which is about to come. This is obviously an especially busy time for political pundits and talking heads. The sort of people who make a living by going onto the TV and they offer us their expert views about topics like sports and politics and everything else in between. Now, when we look ahead to next year, there are, of course, some ways in which we can be fairly confident that we know what's going to happen. There are certain events that we can be certain will take place. We know there will be a presidential election in the United States. It's also very likely that there will be a general election here in the UK. I mean, there's a slim chance it could go on until 2025, but we'd probably all be surprised if that was the case. We also know that this is going to be an Olympic year. There'll be summer games taking place in Paris. There'll be the European Championships for football taking place in Germany as well. But of course, there are other things we can't be sure of. We don't know who's going to win the football. We don't know who the next president will be. And we also know that often the biggest events of the year can be the ones which we don't expect at all. On the 6th of October 2023, things seemed relatively peaceful in the Middle East. And by the following morning, everything had changed. And we will also be aware that it's the same in our personal lives. I'm sure that there are lots of us here who will have done what we've done this week. We've got a new calendar for the coming year, and there are some dates we've already put onto it. Birthdays and times when we hope to be on holiday. But we also know that we can only plan to a certain extent. We know that sometimes life can change almost at a stroke as a consequence of news that someone gives us about our health, about test results, about an accident, about a job. It can only take one phone call. And when events like this happen, we can often be left with an awareness of the extent to which all of our lives are lived at the mercy of factors outside of our control. With our health, we can exercise, we can seek to take good care of our bodies, but we do that with a recognition that it might not be a guarantee about us getting sick. With our jobs, the company we work for can get taken over, and what happens to us is decided by people way above us in the hierarchy. With our finances, we end up paying more on energy bills because of a war in Ukraine, or more on our mortgages because of decisions announced in a mini budget. And so there's this fundamental question which faces all of us as we face the new year. What are we trusting in? And what is the basis for any confidence we might have? I've been thinking a lot about this recently. I've been reflecting on my own journey of faith. And as I look back, I've got to confess that I was often someone who was very confident about what I believed in. I grew up in the sort of church which was very good at drilling us into what to believe, in giving us a framework with which we could make sense of everything that was going on around us. And it gave us a really solid grounding in the Bible, which is one of the things for which I will always be grateful. It also gave us a very detailed set of theology or doctrine which created a sense of certainty about where we stood on all manner of issues. So our church was very clear on what it taught on issues like predestination, God's sovereignty, and the dividing lines between our church and other denominations. They were very clearly laid out. I can remember from a very early age how every week I had to go to Sunday school, and before I went I had to learn a section of what was called the Shorter Catechism, and the teachers would ask me to be able to recite it off by heart. I hated it. I remember thinking every week, is if this is what the Shorter Catechism is like, I hope I never have to learn the longer one. And yet the more I've got on, the more I've realised that having these frameworks, having these beliefs, they can be helpful, but it only takes you so far. One of my favourite lines from the world of sport is something that was once said by the American boxer Mike Tyson. He spoke about how he would prepare for matches and game out, how he would take on his opponent, but it didn't always work out the way he'd foreseen when he got into the ring. And this is how he put it. He said, everyone's got a plan until they're punched in the face. And we probably all know what he means. I think we could say the same thing about our faith. Sometimes life comes at us hard. Sometimes the beliefs that we have relied on for so many years can feel threatened, as if the rug is being pulled from under us when difficult things happen, especially when events happen that don't fit in whatever framework we have. We've stayed faithful, we've said our prayers, but still the illness came, or the financial crisis came, or people let us down. As I was thinking about this passage in Hebrews, I found my mind going back to a famous story which was told about the Catholic missionary Mother Teresa. And the person who told it was a man called John Kavanagh, a Jesuit philosopher. In 1975, he went to work for 3 months at the Home of the Dying in Calcutta, the mission house that she ran. And he'd gone there in an attempt to work through some spiritual struggles he was facing. And on the first morning, he met Mother Teresa, and she asked him, "And what can I do for you?" And Kavanagh asked her to pray for him. And she then asked, "What do you want me to pray for?" And Kavanagh then made what he thought was a very reasonable and sensible request, and an honest one too, because it was the reason, after all, why he'd gone to India. "Pray that I have clarity." And she then replied, "No, I will not do that." And Kavanagh asked her why. And this is how the rest of the story is recorded. Clarity is the last thing that you are clinging to and must let go of. But you always seem to have clarity. Mother Teresa laughed. "I've never had clarity. What I have always had is trust. So I will pray that you trust God." Now, I found that story deeply challenging. It challenges me because I realise that I've spent a lot of my own life looking for clarity. I've done a lot of thinking. I've read a lot of books, tried to work a lot of things out. I've tried to work God out. But the more I go on, the more I find myself realising that what matters most is not knowing about God. It's knowing him. It's about relationship. It's about putting myself in his hands and trusting him for my future. And it seems to me that it's a similar idea which the writer to the Hebrews is suggesting in that short reading we listened to earlier. If you remember the reading, you'll recall that the image he gives us is all to do with running. In the last chapter, Hebrews 11, he's written that famous chapter, which we sometimes refer to as the roll call of faith. He's listed off the great heroes of the Old Testament, and now he refers to them as a cloud of witnesses for those who are now running. It's as if these early followers of Jesus are running a race. They've entered an arena, and from the grandstands, those who have gone before them are cheering them on. And he talks about running with perseverance. As any of you who are runners will know, perseverance is so often the key. At this time of year, I find it's cold outside. You've got to wrap up. It just feels like an act of the will. I'm going to get my trainers on and I'm going to go and run. And the first steps can be really difficult. It takes a while, but you hit your stride and you get going. And the writer to the Hebrews talks about the need to keep going. He says, throw off everything that might entangle you. The image he uses suggests the idea of obstacles or of things that could trip us up. And it's at this point that he offers this very famous, compelling advice about fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down the right hand of the throne of God. So could I encourage us to just think about this image today and maybe to make it a sort of watchword for you as you step into the new year. None of us can really know what will happen, and none of us can control what will happen. I've met some people in my time who seem to spend their lives trying to control things, and I'm never convinced it works, because they end up being controlling of other people, and they come across as always on the lookout for threats, for people who don't fit in with their view of the world, or they try and live by limiting any kind of risk. It doesn't strike me as very life-giving. The writer to the Hebrews talks about not growing weary and losing heart. That's something else you might want to reflect on. It seems to me they're constantly trying to control things. It's exhausting. Sooner or later it'll wear you out. And Jesus does not invite us to this sort of life, not one of guaranteed outcomes or techniques. Jesus invites us to live a life of trust in his Father. He lived with a determination to keep on obeying the Father, even in moments of shame and pain and betrayal. He was able to somehow get through all of that because he knew he was God's son. He knew he was loved, and he knew that beyond the cross, there was something better for him. The joy of being in the Father's presence again and at his right hand. And now as we step into the new year, we have this invitation. Don't fix your eyes on particular resolutions or goals or dates around which you think everything pivots. Just fix your eyes on Jesus and seek to trust him more. And, that might seem counterintuitive to some of us who think in terms of setting goals that we can define and look for outcomes that can be measured. But to get back to that conversation that John Kavanagh had with Mother Teresa, I think that's a difference between clarity and trust. Can we hear in these words from Hebrews a fresh call to trust? Can we understand that the most important ways we might grow in the coming year might not be concerned with what we know of God, but with how much we trust him? So let me pray for you now, friends, as we find ourselves on the threshold of this new year. And I pray for God's blessing on each of you, asking that as you fix your eyes on Jesus, you would find your vision for life renewed, your trust in him strengthened, your joy revived, and your weariness receding. And may this joy be for you and your dear ones, and all with whom you journey in this year to come. Amen. God bless, friends. Be blessed and be a blessing, and Happy New Year. And I look forward to seeing you very soon.